Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're going into a really crucial story from aviation history. It's Aloha Airlines Flight 243 back in April of 1988.
This is, it's more than just an accident report. It's a really terrifying story, but it's also, amazingly, a story about survival.
Absolutely. It's this incredible intersection of catastrophic engineering failure, some systemic oversight, and then just raw human ingenuity and how basic safety rules can make all the difference. Our mission here is to take you through all of it right from the sources. We'll start with this tiny warning sign that was ignored, and we'll go all the way to the huge changes this single flight forced on global aviation.
It really did change everything.
So let's set the scene. It's a routine flight, a really short one, just a 35-minute hop from Hilo to Honolulu. The plane, a Boeing 737, takes off around 1:25 p.m.
Everything's completely normal at this point.
Except for this one detail, and this is, it's really chilling when you read it in the reports. Before the plane even left the gate, a passenger who was waiting to board actually saw a crack.
A crack in the fuselage.
Yeah, a small hairline crack along the riveted panels right near the door. They saw it, but they didn't say anything.
Wow. And you can understand why, right? You'd probably just assume it's a scratch in the paint or something, cosmetic.
Exactly. You wouldn't think it's a sign that the plane is about to fall apart.
And that single moment, that hesitation, it just perfectly frames the core of the problem here. This incident became this spectacular and horrifying demonstration of the dangers in what we call high-cycle aircraft.
Okay, so break that down for us. What does high cycle actually mean?
It just means planes that do a lot of short flights. So instead of flying, across the Atlantic, they're doing these island hops, lots of takeoffs, lots of landings.
And that matters because of the pressure changes.
Exactly. Every single time a plane climbs, the cabin pressurizes, then it depressurizes when it lands. That cycle makes the metal skin of the plane flex just a tiny bit.
But over and over and over.
Thousands and thousands of times. And that constant stress just builds up. The visual inspections they were doing at the time, they just weren't enough to catch the kind of deep metal fatigue that was building up under the skin of this plane.
So you have a plane with all this hidden stress, and then about 20 minutes into the flight, they hit their cruising altitude, 24,000 feet. And that stress it hits its breaking point.
It was instantaneous. The NTSB reports say it was like a zipper effect. All these tiny hidden fatigue cracks and corrosion points just linked up all at once.
A massive, explosive decompression.
The sound must have been just deafening, followed by this violent rush of air as the roof of the cabin just tore away.
The scale of the damage it's hard to comprehend. We're talking about 35 square meters of the plane.
Which is an enormous section.
It's basically the entire roof from just behind the cockpit all the way back to the wings. It just disintegrated, gone.
And in that instant, you have 65 passengers who are now just exposed to the open sky.
And the conditions they were thrown into were, unsurvivable.
Absolutely catastrophic. The temperature plummets to minus 45 degrees Celsius. The wind blasting through the cabin is almost 500 kilometers per hour.
But the biggest, most immediate threat was the lack of oxygen, hypoxia.
Right. Now, the oxygen masks did deploy automatically like they're supposed to.
But it didn't matter.
It didn't matter at all. The entire system, the tubes, the supply lines, it was all attached to that roof section that was now gone. So the masks dropped down, but there was no oxygen flowing to them.
So people are freezing, they're being hit by hurricane-force winds, and they're starting to lose consciousness.
Yeah, and the tragedy of the flight attendant, C.B. Lansing, just highlights how violent it was. She was near row 5, and she was. She was blown out of the aircraft. She was the only fatality.
It's just horrific. But we also hear about these incredible moments of just pure heroism inside that cabin.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Flight attendant Jane Sato was hit by debris and got a severe concussion. But Michelle Honda, her actions are just amazing.
What does she do?
Even with all that chaos, with the real risk of being pulled out herself, she stayed conscious. The sources say she was crawling up the aisle, trying to help passengers, trying to get to the cockpit to see if the pilots were okay.
When the plane could have literally torn apart at any second.
It's just phenomenal bravery.
Which brings us to the biggest question. How did anyone else survive this? How was it not a total loss of life?
This is the really incredible part of the story, and the answer is, it's almost mundane.
Okay.
The single biggest reason for the high survival rate was that almost everyone was wearing their seatbelt.
The seatbelt sign was still on?
The seatbelt sign was still on. They had only just reached cruising altitude. The pilots hadn't turned it off yet.
So a simple routine procedure saved dozens of lives.
Absolutely. If that sign had been off, if people had been up and moving around, going to the restroom,
Yeah.
the death toll would have been catastrophic. We know the most serious injuries were right there in that blowout zone between rows 4 and 7, but the seatbelts kept people in their seats.
Meanwhile, in the cockpit, Captain Robert Schomstheimer and First Officer Mimi Tompkins were alive.
They were alive, strapped in, and crucially, their own personal oxygen masks were working. They immediately started an emergency descent.
And what a descent. They were dropping at a terrifying rate.
4,100 feet per minute, while still flying at about 500 kilometers per hour. They had to get down to a breathable altitude as fast as humanly possible for anyone who was still conscious in the back.
And they did. In 3 minutes, they were down to 14,000 feet.
Just an incredible piece of flying. But you have to understand what they were actually flying at this point.
It's been described as a convertible.
It was basically a giant open-top tube that was threatening to break in half. The whole front section, the cockpit, was visibly drooping down by about a meter.
So the only thing connecting them to the rest of the plane was, what, the floor?
Just the floor beams, that's it. Every single move they made, every turn, risked the entire nose section just shearing off completely.
And their problems were far from over. As they approached Maui for the landing, they had more hurdles.
3 huge ones. First, there's a mountain, the Halekulaka summit, that's 10,000 feet high, right in their path. They had to maneuver around it while slowing the plane down, which is incredibly risky when your airframe is this compromised.
And then came a mechanical failure.
Yep. As if things weren't bad enough, the left engine failed completely.
So now they're flying a broken plane with only one engine.
A broken plane with one engine, trying to slow it down to a dangerously low speed of 170 knots for the final approach.
And then the last scare, the landing gear.
The final, terrifying moment. An indicator light suggested the nose gear wasn't down, and that raises the fear of a belly landing.
Which would have been the end. The structure would have just collapsed.
It would have been unsurvivable. But what saved them here was just quick thinking on the ground. They couldn't see the gear. They couldn't trust the sensors. The final confirmation came from someone on the runway with a pair of binoculars.
Wow. Just watching the plane come in.
Watching it and radioing in that, yes, the gear is down. It's locked.
And the landing itself.
A masterpiece of airmanship. Just 13 minutes and 42 seconds after the explosion, at 1:58 p.m., they were safely on the ground in Maui. They used the brakes and the thrust reverser from the one engine they had left.
Yeah.
It's one of the most remarkable landings in aviation history.
So the immediate crisis is over, but the investigation, the search for the why, was just beginning. What did the NTSB find? What was the root cause?
It was really a perfect storm of a flawed design, a harsh environment, and frankly, poor maintenance. The technical cause came down to fatigue and corrosion in what are called the lap joints.
Okay, explain what a lap joint is.
So imagine 2 sheets of the plane's aluminum skin overlapping, kind of like shingles on a roof. Boeing secured them in 2 ways, with rivets, but also with an epoxy glue that was supposed to bond them together.
So it had a backup system.
It was supposed to, but this plane was operating in Hawaii. The air there is very humid, very salty, and that environment just destroyed the epoxy, degraded, it failed.
And once the glue failed, all the stress went onto the rivets.
Every bit of it, on every single flight. And those rivets started developing tiny microscopic cracks. The cracks grew, they linked up, and eventually they created that zipper effect that tore the plane open.
And this was all made worse by the fact that the plane was just old.
It was flying on borrowed time. It had completed 90,000 flight cycles, 90,000.
Right.
Boeing's own recommended service life was 75,000.
So they were well past the expiration date.
Way past. So you have this combination of an aging structure, a design that was vulnerable to corrosion, and flying way beyond its lifespan. It was a disaster waiting to happen.
So if the problem was this bad, this systemic, how did the maintenance crews miss it? Which leads to the question of accountability. Who did the NTSB blame?
Well, they spread the blame pretty widely. They pointed to failures at 3 different levels. First and most directly was Aloha Airlines management.
What did they do wrong?
They were criticized for not properly supervising their maintenance teams. But the really damning thing was that they had falsely claimed to be using an advanced inspection technique.
Falsely claimed, so they were lying on their reports.
It looks like it was negligence covered up by paperwork. They said they were using a technique called eddy current testing to find cracks. But the NTSB found they either weren't doing it at all or they were doing it completely wrong. They were basically just relying on the naked eye.
And the naked eye wasn't going to find these tiny cracks under the surface.
Not a chance.
Okay, so that's the airline. What about the regulators, the FAA?
The FAA got its share of the blame, too. They were criticized because they had issued a directive about potential cracks on this model of 737, but they didn't require the inspections to be thorough enough. They didn't mandate the kind of deep, non-visual scans that were clearly needed.
So they knew there was a potential problem, but their fix wasn't strong enough.
Exactly. And finally, Boeing itself, and the FAA again, were criticized for just not taking the problem with that old epoxy bonding technique seriously enough. They underestimated how much damage a human environment could do over time.
So it was a cascade of failures: corporate, regulatory, and design.
It took a plane ripping apart in midair for the entire industry to wake up to the very real danger of aging fleets.
And the legacy of this flight is just immense. It truly forced a permanent, fundamental change in how we think about aviation safety.
The reaction was immediate. First, all of Boeing's older 737s around the world were grounded for immediate inspections. And sure enough, they found similar cracks in other planes.
So this wasn't an isolated problem with Aloha's plane.
Not at all. It was systemic. And that forced the FAA to act. In 1991, they launched the Aging Aircraft Safety Program, which mandated much tougher inspections for all older planes. Congress also passed the Aviation Safety Research Act to fund better technology.
Which brings us back to that eddy current technology that Aloha wasn't really using.
And that was the core of the philosophical shift. The industry finally accepted that you can't rely on the human eye to find these kinds of flaws. You have to use technology.
Things like eddy current and ultrasonic testing.
Exactly. And just so you understand, the eddy current technique is so critical because it doesn't just look at the surface. It uses magnetic fields to find tiny cracks and imperfections under the paint, inside the rivet holes, places you could never see.
So the safety standards that keep us all safe on planes today were, in many ways, written because of what happened to Flight 243. It's this whole journey from an ignored crack and regulatory failures to a disaster that was only averted by incredible flying and, of all things, the seatbelt sign.
It really is a remarkable story of human failure leading to a necessary technological revolution. And since this incident completely changed safety by mandating technologies like eddy current, we've basically traded the unreliability of human sight for the precision of machine detection. So this leaves a really interesting question for you to think about. Given that Flight 243 was flying so far beyond its designed life, and our global fleet continues to get older, what happens as we rely more and more on these automated systems? What unexpected problems might we be overlooking when that human element, that holistic sense of observation, is minimized?